September 1986, Tokyo. A Swedish rock band stands at the absolute peak of the world. Their song is everywhere, on radios, in stadiums, in the heads of millions. The final countdown isn't just a hit, it's a global anthem. But behind the curtain, just minutes before the roar of the crowd, something unthinkable happens. Backstage, in a quiet room far from the screaming fans, the band's lead guitarist looks at his bandmates and says the words no one expects to hear at the height of success: "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." This isn't the story of how a band made it big. This is the story of how one of the most iconic songs of the 1980s pushed its creators to the breaking point and nearly tore the band apart. It started with a borrowed keyboard in a teenager's basement. The year was 1981, maybe 1982. Joey Tempest, a 17-year-old kid from Upplands Väsby, Sweden, can't quite remember. What he does remember is the synthesizer he borrowed from his friend Mike Michaeli, a Korg Poly-6, not exactly the weapon of choice for a hard rock guitarist. Tempest had transformed the basement of his family's two-story house into a makeshift recording studio. Acoustic treatment on the walls, a Tascam 8-track recorder, and that keyboard. Since he was 7 years old, he had been recording songs off the television, afraid he'd never hear them again. Now he was creating something entirely new. And then it happened. His fingers found a riff, bold, brassy, anthemic. He played it over and over, improvising vocals, imagining stadiums full of people. He recorded it, just 1 minute long, a demo that would sit in a drawer for years, waiting. Joey Tempest wasn't thinking about pop music or synthesizers dominating rock radio. He was thinking about David Bowie's Space Oddity, about leaving Earth, about the final countdown to something bigger. He was thinking about Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and UFO, the bands that made him pick up a guitar in the first place. But that riff was pure 1980s, waiting to explode. By 1982, Tempest and his bandmates in Force, including a Norwegian-born guitarist named John Norum, had changed their name to Europe, inspired by Deep Purple's live album Made in Europe. They won a televised Swedish rock championship called Rock SM. The prize, a record deal. Tempest won Best Lead Singer. Norum won Best Guitarist. Their first two albums sold well in Sweden and Japan. They were building something, a hard rock band in the tradition of their heroes. Guitar-driven, powerful, raw. But by 1985, that 1 minute keyboard demo was about to change everything. It was bassist John Levin who pulled that old demo out of Joey's drawer. "You should write a full song around that riff," he said. Tempest agreed. He expanded it, added lyrics inspired by Space Oddity, and structured it like an opening anthem for their concerts. Nothing more. Certainly not a single. When he played it for the band, the reaction was mixed. Joey Tempest would later recall, "Some of the guys in the band thought it was too different for a rock band, but in the end I fought hard to make sure it got used." John Norum's reaction was more visceral. He hated it. "When I first heard the synth intro," Norum would later admit, "my reaction was, no, this is nuts. We just can't use this. I was into heavy rock. Hearing that synthesizer melody over and over drove me nuts. I didn't want to have anything to do with the song." But here's the irony. Norum came down to Tempest's basement and recorded the guitar solo for that very demo, a solo that would become one of the most iconic in 1980s rock. And he did it in just 15 minutes. Inspired by Ritchie Blackmore's technique, triplet runs, pentatonic blues licks, and that signature whammy bar bend at the end, Norum channeled everything he loved about Guitar Heroes into one perfect take on his 1965 Fender Stratocaster plugged into a Marshall JCM 800. "I recorded that solo in about 15 minutes, Norum recalled, and I've played it thousands of times since. I can do it in my sleep." Despite Norum's reservations, the band moved forward. They wanted to sound like Journey, that polished arena rock production. So they hired Journey's producer, Kevin Elson, who had worked on those multi-platinum albums in the late 70s and early 80s. In September 1985, Europe traveled to Powerplay Studios in Zurich, Switzerland. Surrounded by the Swiss countryside and isolated from distractions, they recorded for 5 weeks straight. Elson gave Norum a guitar sound he had never achieved before, a perfect blend of his Boss overdrive pedals pushing that Marshall into sweet distortion. The keyboard parts were meticulously layered. Mike Michaeli used a Roland JX8P for the brassy synth sound, doubled with a factory preset from a Yamaha TX816 rack unit. That combination, guitar and keyboards, created something neither purely rock nor purely pop. Something in between. Something that would define 1986. But when the album was mixed at Fantasy Studios in San Francisco in March 1986, John Norum wasn't pleased. The keyboards had buried the rhythm guitars in the final mix, he complained. The direction was clear. Europe was no longer just a guitar band. And Norum knew it. On May 26, 1986, the final countdown was released. The band hadn't even wanted it as a single. Some members preferred Rock the Night. They'd written the song as a concert opener. Nothing more. But Epic Records insisted. And Epic Records was right. The song exploded. Over the course of 1986 and into 1987, it climbed to #1 in 25 countries. The UK, France, Germany, Spain, and dozens more. It reached #8 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. The album went triple platinum in America, with over 15 million copies sold worldwide between the album and the single. That synthesizer riff, the one John Norum thought was too poppy, became the most recognizable opening in rock music. Suddenly, Europe was everywhere. MTV played the video constantly, footage from their Solnahallen concerts in Sweden, complete with dramatic countdown clock imagery. They opened for Def Leppard on tour. They were guests on every music show. Success, instantaneous and overwhelming, had arrived. But behind the scenes, the band was fracturing. John Norum found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. That 15-minute solo had made him famous. But famous for what? For being the guitar player in a keyboard band, for being a heavy metal guitarist in a song defined by synthesizers. The lifestyle accelerated. Interviews from morning till night. Early flights, TV appearances, and the image, oh, the image. Big hair, spandex pants, appearing in magazines next to Samantha Fox and Rick Astley. This wasn't Deep Purple. This wasn't Led Zeppelin. This was something Norum didn't recognize. We became this teeny bopper bubblegum band, Norum would later say, and I hated that whole image. I was more into the heavier, guitar-oriented stuff, and it seemed like the keyboards were taking over more and more, and we were becoming more commercial. And then there was the drinking, the excess, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll cliche that Norum watched his bandmates embrace. Some members, he'd later hint, got really big-headed. He was waking up with hangovers every day, realizing this wasn't the life he wanted. This wasn't who he was. Success had come too fast, and it felt all wrong. But there was also a deeper conflict brewing. Tensions with the band's manager, Thomas Ertman, began before the tour even started. Creative disagreements, business decisions, Norum didn't agree with. Control was slipping away, and the music, the thing that mattered most, was being buried under synthesizers and commercial demands. In September 1986, Europe went on a Japanese tour. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka. At the peak of their fame, with the whole world at their feet, John Norum made a decision. He told the other band members he was done. Norum finished out the remaining tour dates he'd committed to. The promotional appearances, the TV spots, the European shows, but he was already mentally gone. He went through the motions, a ghost playing the greatest guitar solo of his life while hating every minute of it. In November 1986, it became official. John Norum was leaving Europe. No dramatic walk-off, no public blowout, just a quiet final goodbye to the band he'd co-founded 7 years earlier. And then he was gone, from the biggest band in the world. I didn't really care if the album was #1 in 30 countries at the time, Norum said. It didn't really matter. I just wanted to move on and do something else. Europe replaced him with Key Marcello, a guitarist from another Swedish band called Easy Action. Marcello, who had been reluctant to join, he'd put so much work into Easy Action's upcoming album, eventually said yes. He appeared in the videos for Rock the Night, Cherokee, and Carrie. The power ballad Carrie would become Europe's biggest American hit, reaching #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Joey Tempest would later admit, when John left Europe, it was the beginning of the end for the band. John is a unique guitar player. His sound is very raw and in your face, and at the same time, very melodic. There is nobody like him. Europe soldiered on. Their next album, Out of This World, 1988, sold 1 million copies in the United States and produced the hit Superstitious. But something essential was missing. They'd never recapture the lightning-in-a-bottle magic of the final countdown, and they'd never escape its shadow. Then came 1991, Prisoners in Paradise. The album that should have cemented their legacy instead buried it. Epic Records rejected their initial demos, an entire album they'd called Seventh Sign. Too risky, not commercial enough. The label forced them to write new songs, bringing in outside songwriters like Jim Vallance and Eric Martin. The band that had started as a raw, guitar-driven rock outfit was now taking creative direction from executives. But the bigger problem was timing. 1991 wasn't 1986. The musical landscape had transformed completely. Nirvana's Nevermind, Pearl Jam's 10, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. Grunge had arrived and it had no patience for synthesizers, big hair, or power ballads. Prisoners in Paradise failed to chart in the United States, an almost unthinkable fall for a band that had sold triple platinum albums just 5 years earlier. The single, I'll Cry For You, managed to hit number 28 in the UK, but it was too little, too late. On New Year's Eve 1991, Europe kicked off what would be their final tour at the Tokyo Dome, a massive show alongside Metallica, Thunder, and Tesla, billed as Final Countdown 91. It was a fitting bookend in a way, but the tour wound on for months after that. It ended quietly in Portsmouth, England, in March 1992. Joey Tempest would later recall a conversation on the tour bus. We really felt ready for a break. We felt that it was time to put some roots down. They'd been living, recording, and touring together for over a decade. They were exhausted, and they were done. And the Final Countdown lived on. It became a staple at sporting events worldwide. It soundtracked victories, celebrations, and countdowns of every kind. It appeared in movies and TV shows, Arrested Development, Glee, Pitch Perfect. In 2015, Europe even appeared in a Geico commercial, performing the song in an office break room while someone microwaved a burrito. The joke was clear. If you're Europe, you love a Final Countdown. It's what you do. The music video has now surpassed 1.3 billion views on YouTube. Magazines like Blender called it one of the worst songs ever made. VH1 ranked it as one of the most awesomely bad songs ever. But those same critics couldn't deny its power. VH1 also ranked it number 66 on their list of the best hard rock songs of all time. It's simultaneously beloved and mocked, timeless and dated, a masterpiece and a punchline. On December 31st, 1999, as the world celebrated the millennium, Europe reunited for one night in Stockholm. Both John Norum and Key Marcello, the two lead guitarists who had never played together, shared the stage. They performed Rock the Night and the Final Countdown for Swedish television. It was magical. It was closure. And it was a beginning. In 2003, Europe officially reformed. John Norum returned after 17 years away. The classic lineup, Tempest, Norum, John Levin, Mike McKaylee, and Ian Haugland, was back together. They'd released 6 more studio albums, including Start From the Dark, 2004, which returned to their heavier, guitar-driven roots. The band Norum had wanted them to be in 1986. But they could never escape the Final Countdown. At every show, the crowd waits for it. That synthesizer riff, that guitar solo, the anthem that made them global superstars and tore them apart. The story of the Final Countdown is the story of success and sacrifice, of artistic vision compromised by commercial reality, of a band torn apart by the very thing that made them famous. Sometimes the Final Countdown isn't about the end. It's about figuring out what you're really fighting for and whether the price of success is worth paying.